The afternoon sun filtered through the dusty windows of Jake's small motorcycle repair shop, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Tools lay scattered around a vintage bike that had seen better days, their metal surfaces catching the golden light. Jake wiped his hands on an old rag, leaving streaks of engine oil across the worn fabric. His shop wasn't much to look at from the outside. Tucked between a laundromat and a corner grocery store on the quieter side of town, it barely drew attention from passing traffic. But inside these walls, Jake had built something meaningful. Every dent in the workbench told a story. Every tool had its place. This was his sanctuary, the place where broken things became whole again. The bell above the front door chimed softly, and Jake looked up from the carburetor he'd been examining. A woman stepped inside, her dark hair falling in waves past her shoulders. She wore simple jeans and a gray t-shirt, but something about the way she carried herself suggested she wasn't from the neighborhood. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying a slight tremor of frustration. "I'm having some trouble with my bike outside. It just stopped working." Jake set down his tools and walked toward the front of the shop. Through the window, he could see a sleek motorcycle parked at the curb. It was a beautiful machine, well-maintained but clearly in distress. "I'm Sarah," the woman offered, extending her hand. "Jake," he replied, accepting her handshake. Her grip was firm, confident, but he noticed the slight callus on her palm that spoke of someone who wasn't afraid of hard work. They walked outside together, and Jake knelt beside the motorcycle. The engine was still warm, and he could smell the faint scent of overheated metal. Sarah stood a few feet away, watching as he ran his hands along the bike's frame, listening for clues the way a doctor might examine a patient. "When did it start acting up?" Jake asked, not looking up from his inspection. "About 10 miles back," Sarah said. "It began making this strange rattling sound. Then just died. I managed to coast here, but now it won't start at all." Jake nodded, his experienced hands moving with practiced ease. He'd seen this before. The bike was a newer model, expensive, but even the best machines could develop problems. He popped open the toolkit he'd brought from inside and began his examination. Sarah pulled up a plastic chair from beside the shop's entrance and settled in to watch. There was something peaceful about the way Jake worked, methodical and unhurried. His movements were precise, purposeful. He didn't rush or force anything, just let his knowledge guide him through the process. "You do this long?" Sarah asked after several minutes of comfortable silence. "About 15 years, Jake replied, his voice slightly muffled as he leaned closer to examine the engine. "Started when I was just out of high school. Always had a thing for machines, I guess. They make sense to me in a way that well, in a way that most things don't." Sarah smiled at that. "I understand. There's something honest about mechanical problems. They have solutions, clear causes and effects." Jake glanced up at her, surprised by the insight. Most people just wanted their bikes fixed and moved on. They didn't think about the philosophy behind repair work. "Exactly," he said. "No politics, no hidden agendas. Just metal and moving parts that either work together or they don't." As Jake continued his work, Sarah found herself studying him. His movements were careful, respectful of the machine he was trying to heal. There was a gentleness in his approach that spoke of someone who understood that rushing often led to more problems. "You have kids?" Sarah asked, noticing a small framed photo on his workbench visible through the open shop door. Jake's hands paused for just a moment. "A daughter, Emma. She's 8. His voice carried a mixture of pride and something else, something tender and protective. "It's just the two of us." Sarah nodded, understanding immediately that there was a story there, one that Jake wasn't ready to share with a stranger. She respected that boundary, the same way he was respecting her motorcycle, taking time to understand before trying to fix. The afternoon wore on, and Jake worked steadily while Sarah watched. Occasionally he would explain what he was doing, pointing out different components and their functions. Sarah listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions that showed she was truly paying attention. "I think I found your problem," Jake said finally, holding up a small metal part. This connection came loose. It's not a big repair, but it's crucial. Without it, your electrical system can't communicate properly with the engine. Sarah looked at the tiny piece of metal. Such a small thing to cause so much trouble. That's usually how it is, Jake said with a slight smile. The biggest problems often have the smallest causes. As Jake made the repair, replacing the faulty connection and testing the electrical system, Sarah found herself thinking about his words. They seemed to apply to more than just motorcycles. In her own life, she'd learned that the smallest gestures often meant the most, while grand displays frequently fell flat. "There," Jake said, wiping his hands clean. "Try starting her up now." Sarah turned the key, and the engine roared to life immediately. The sound was smooth, powerful, exactly as it should be. She revved it gently, feeling the bike respond perfectly to her touch. "That's incredible," she said, her face lighting up with genuine gratitude. "How much do I owe you?" Jake considered for a moment. The repair had taken him nearly 2 hours, and the part itself was relatively expensive. But looking at Sarah, seeing the relief in her eyes, he found himself quoting a price that barely covered his costs. Sarah pulled out her wallet, but instead of the $20 or $30 Jake had asked for, she handed him a $100 bill. "That's too much," Jake protested immediately. "No," Sarah said firmly. "It's exactly right. You didn't just fix my bike, Jake. You gave me your time, your expertise, and your patience. You treated me like a person, not just another customer. That's worth more than you know." Jake looked at the money, then at Sarah. There was something in her eyes, a depth that suggested she understood the value of genuine kindness in a world that often seemed to have forgotten it. "I don't usually accept tips this large," Jake said quietly. "Then don't think of it as a tip," Sarah replied. "Think of it as an investment in good people doing good work." As Sarah prepared to leave, she hesitated beside her motorcycle. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The neighborhood around them was settling into evening routines, porch lights beginning to flicker on. "Jake," she said finally, "would you like to have dinner sometime? I mean, as friends? You seem like someone who might enjoy good conversation, and I don't meet many people who understand the value of taking time to do things right." Jake looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since she'd walked into his shop. There was something about Sarah that went beyond her appearance, beyond the expensive motorcycle and the generous tip. She had treated him with respect, had been genuinely interested in his work, had asked about his daughter without prying. "I like that," he said simply. Sarah smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes and transformed her entire face. "Good, I'll stop by tomorrow evening if that works for you. Maybe we can close up shop a little early." As she rode away, the sound of her perfectly running motorcycle fading into the evening air, Jake stood outside his small shop and watched her disappear around the corner. He didn't know that Sarah Chun was one of the wealthiest tech entrepreneurs in the country. He didn't know that she'd been driving aimlessly through small towns, tired of a world where every interaction felt calculated and artificial. All Jake knew was that a woman had trusted him with something that mattered to her, and in return she had seen something valuable in him. Sometimes the most important connections were formed in the simplest ways, between people who understood that the best relationships, like the best repairs, required patience, skill, and genuine care. The next evening, as Jake watched Sarah's motorcycle pull up outside his shop once again, he realized that sometimes the most beautiful things in life came disguised as ordinary moments. As simple as a stranger needing help and two people discovering they had more in common than either had expected.